Hi and welcome to Below the Radar. This is the Triumph Fury that you've already seen in an initial video, which has proved to be by far the most popular film that I've put together. So bearing in mind that you can't have too much of a good thing, I'm doing a second video talking to Jane Weitzmann, who bought the car back in 2009. So Jane, you've got quite a collection of cars.
A few, yes.
Yes, quite a few of which have featured on Below the Radar. How does this fit into them all?
This fits again because the ethos of the collection is rare and quirky, and obviously being a one-off, she's rare.
She's pretty rare, yeah. You don't get much rarer than unique, yes? So how did you come to buy the Fury?
It all goes back really to when I was 17, 18, passed my test, wanted a car. Couldn't afford one, and then sadly my godmother passed away and left me £500. And I went window shopping with my cousin to a Triumph dealer, but I couldn't afford a new Spitfire at the time. However, a lady drove in with this primrose yellow Mark III Spitfire, and we were admiring it and chatting to her, and she was about to go in and order a GT6. And so this was going to be a part exchange, her Spitfire. So we did a deal for my whole £500 inheritance, went straight on the car, sort of
wisely
recurrent
spent.
history.
Very
Yes.
wisely spent, yeah.
Recurrent history in my life. It's always, any money? Yeah, I'll buy a car. And I adored my Spitfire. And I thought about buying another one, but I felt you can't meet your heroes in a way, and it was sort of, if I went back, would I be disappointed? Would I spoil the memories of my first
So how long
car?
did you own that Spitfire for?
I owned her for about 4 years.
So you did a lot of miles, presumably?
Yes. Yeah.
Your original
a
Triumph.
a lot of joy with her.
Yeah.
So I'd sort of been thinking, you know, do I, don't I? And then I went to the Goodwood revival, and Hurst Park autos were there.
Yeah.
And I went to say hello to them because we bought a few cars from them before, and there she was, sat there.
Had you ever come across the Fury before?
No, I knew absolutely nothing about it.
Right.
I just looked at her and thought, it's a grown-up Spitfire. Now this is probably the answer to my problems, is, well, do I have another one, don't I? And yeah, bought her there and then. Absolutely fascinated to hear that she was the only one and all the history, but even if she hadn't have been, I'd have bought her.
Yeah, well, it is the car that they should have put into production. I mean, you know, it looks great, a little bit more spacious than a Spitfire, 2 litre straight six, a bit more performance.
Yes.
So how well do you remember your Spitfire? How does this compare with your Spitfire?
I think it compares very favourably for my memories to my Spitfire. It's probably what I remember my Spitfire being, but if I got back in another one, I'd find it wasn't. But I mean, that drove beautifully, and this drives beautifully. It has got obviously that bit more poke, bit more energy, and it's just adorable.
I'm hoping we can hear all that over those geese that just flew over, because they seemed very loud to me.
They did seem very
Yeah,
loud.
probably can't hear anything that you said. I can just hear the geese, but we can see your mouth moving, so that'll be all right. So try and read your lips later on. So when you bought it, was it in this condition?
It appeared to be in very nice condition. There were a few minor bits and pieces, but really nothing much. However, after almost 10 years, I discovered a little bit of rust on this door, actually. So I sent it down to my local garage, and he then investigated and found out there was actually a lot of rust underneath. And when he took out the windscreen, massive amount of rust all round here.
Right.
So it's ended up now with quite a lot of welding to be done, quite a lot of repair, and a complete respray.
So how much history did the car come with?
The car came with a massive history file. After she was brought over to the Triumph factory in 64, 65, she sat there till 69 when somebody in the factory, the history's all there, asked to buy it. He bought it. So the history file was started then. It then was passed on to a friend of his who bought the car off him, and I think I'm only the next owner. So there's a lovely
Because it was in the
file.
Patrick collection for a while, wasn't it?
Yes.
So was that the previous owner to you?
I believe so.
Right, okay.
Yes, from memory.
And do you know what work so when it was owned by the Patrick collection, my understanding is that the car was restored by them, well, repainted at least.
Yes.
Do you know how extensive the work was? Whether they got into the realms of panel work, or was it just paint?
I believe it was just paint, but to be honest, it's a long time since I looked at the file.
Yeah, I'm not say. And what about mechanically? Is it basically original mechanically?
Yes. Yes.
Is there anything that isn't original?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not that I know of. Certainly, you know, we've done nothing, needed to do nothing to her mechanically. Apart from the respray and the welding, the seats needed restuffing.
Yeah.
But
the seats, the interior is all original, isn't it?
It's original.
Because it's never needed anything significant doing.
No, I was very anxious not to replace the material. So it's been sort of repaired, and some bits have had to be, I think these bits were done recently, because when the seats were restuffed, it split the material. But, you know, we found some old vinyl to keep it.
And it's got, how many miles are on the clock?
42,286.
And that would presumably be the original mileage.
Yes.
So actually it's had a lot of use.
Yes, but I mean, I've taken her to
France,
I've driven her around, you know, places like that, and I mean, she drives beautifully. So it's a joy to drive, really is. She's a very easy car to drive, very nice car to drive, say handles well around the lanes, you can push her around, you know, at a proper, sensible pace, but thoroughly enjoyable. Fabulous gearbox, really neat, tiny change.
But without overdrive, which is interesting.
No overdrive.
I always wondered why Triumph didn't put an overdrive unit, and this is a kind of a premium car.
Yes, I think perhaps because, you know, once it was sort of built and brought over and they decided they weren't going to put it into production, it was sort of a case of just shove it in the back of the factory, forget about it, and possibly, you know.
But you've never thought about converting it to overdrive?
No, I'm a purist, and I don't tend to alter cars from how they came out of the factory unless absolutely necessary on something like cooling.
And you've got a decent sized boot, you've got a space behind the front seats for carrying luggage.
Yep.
Plenty of power.
Absolutely. No, the only disadvantage I've ever found is the vacuum operated headlights.
And how reliable have they been?
They've been perfectly reliable, but of course as you're zooming around the French countryside in the dark, the more zoom, the lower the lights get. And then you find you're zooming around really in the dark and you can't see anything. So you have to ease off, and then they go, oh yes! And you think, there's a road.
Presumably if you ding the panels on this, you're not going to get any second-hand ones on eBay.
No, not quite.
But you have had the car 3D scanned?
I did, for exactly that reason, because I thought, you know, even if I'm a wonderful driver and I'm not going to have an accident, but somebody else could go into me. And if you smashed in the whole front end, where do you rebuild? How do you rebuild? So I took the decision to have her 3D scanned. So all that information is now digitally available to reproduce any of the panels that's required.
And because it's a monocoque construction, presumably, apart from maybe the windscreen surround, everything is bespoke to this car?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, there's nothing carried over.
Nothing.
Yeah, the bumpers are different.
Yes.
The rear lights I know are Triumph 2000 units, but everything else is bespoke in terms of bodywork and interior. But the mechanicals are all carried over from various Triumphs.
Various Triumphs.
Okay. So how did the 3D scanning project come about?
I knew of the company, 3D Engineers I think they're called, but long time ago again, from having another car of mine 3D scanned, and it was a very simple process really. They come up with this big scanner thing, you know, set on a tripod, and it scans round the various bits of the car and gets all the information in digitally. That's only stage one, which is what you pay your initial cost for, and then if you need it you pay for stage two, where they work on that information and format it into something that can be used to produce a panel.
I'm intrigued because you would do that from the outside, but unless you do it inside as well and strip the car out, how would you know about the internal profile of the panels? I mean, in theory it's just the same as the external, but if you've got box sections, what about thicknesses? And you know, how it's just intriguing that they could actually take that and produce a panel with it.
I would guess that the internal side doesn't matter quite so much, as long as you're producing the outside that's the same.
Right.
It doesn't really matter if how you reach the inside. Or
okay,
how you
so
reach
if the profile is slightly changed,
it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I guess that's fair
enough. How you get to point B from the inside point of view, as long as the outside is as it should be.
Yeah, yeah, okay. But hopefully you'll never need that.
Hopefully, you'll never need it. Well, it's more like sort of insurance, really. It's sort of, as long as you've paid for it and had it done, you know, it can be guaranteed you're never going to need it.
Yes, it's there if you need it. Hopefully you won't.
Hopefully we won't.
Well, it's a sensational looking car. It's a real shame Triumph didn't put her into production.
It is, isn't it?
It would have been a fantastic you know, kind of halo model. But I suppose we got the Stag in 1970.
Yes.
And maybe, you know, that's where this would have been potentially.